Welcome back to the collaboration space. I'm your host, Matthew DeFreitas. Joining me as a special co-host and AVI-SPL's new Senior Vice President of ESG and Sustainability is Kelly Bousman. Welcome to the collaboration space, Kelly.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. Today, we're looking at how organizations can innovate in the modern workplace to meet and exceed ESG and sustainability goals.
Yes, I'm super excited for this topic. And sitting down with us today is Chris Bottger, Cisco's hybrid workplace experience go-to-market strategy leader. Chris, welcome.
Thank you, Kelly. Matthew, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk sustainability. Chris, I've been following Cisco at the forefront of sustainability, from the design of your products to the design and operation of your buildings. You recently told me about how optimizing your workplace operations is what's giving you the most significant sustainability value through energy savings. I recall some remarkable before and after data points that tell this story. Tell us more about that.
Yes, I think it's a given often these days that the products that we have specific mandates of targets we have to meet from a circular design on the product side. But as we discussed before, it's really about what you actually do when you operate the product, where you actually make the most energy impact. The example, we have done a number of different buildings, our offices, that we have either built brand new in the last few years or retrofitted. Once you do a retrofit, you can measure the before and after. So that was really the case that you're referring to, which is our PENN 1 location, which we completely retrofitted during the hybrid era, during the pandemic, I should say. And the results before to after were a 40% reduction in energy on about a 50,000 square foot floor that we have there in a 52-year-old building right on 34th Street.
Wow. So walk us through a little bit on the steps that Cisco took to achieve that PENN 1 vision. I mean, what was different? What was different about the technology solutions that you deployed there? And how did that change your sustainability metrics?
Yeah, so I think from a initial sort of design perspective this was a challenge for the architects, as well as actually Venado, who are the building owners, in terms of we said we have to start with the technology and work our way out and around that. And if anybody's watching and they're in IT, normally that's the last thing that you do. Normally architects do all the buildings and everything else and all the rooms, and they say, oh, let's throw some technology at it. That wouldn't work here. And then we wouldn't get a couple of things that were important to us. One is we wanted to create an environment whereby the office becomes a magnet, not a mandate. Pick up the news any day of the week these days, and most companies are in a position where they're mandating their employees to come back because they can't figure out how to make it a magnet. We've been incredibly successful at making it a magnet. So that starts with then saying, okay, let's make sure that the environment is phenomenal for the employees. And let's make sure that given that we're in a hybrid work environment, that they can work from anywhere. So we equipped every single space with video. We drove everything in there with power over Ethernet, PoE. So we have power over Ethernet lights, shades, everything that's actually there. By taking everything down to low voltage, we were able to take out 5,000 pounds of copper and steel. So which meant for the next building that we did, which actually happened to be Atlanta, in there, we didn't have to put that in the first place. So just think about the amount of energy you just saved without having to put those materials actually in there. And then by controlling those environments in specific ways, specifically our video devices, which is obviously where AVI-SPL comes in as well. You guys are an integrator and have the ability to integrate these PoE devices, which are now digital devices. And then you can do some really good things where the video system in the room can control the lights and the shades and really start to drive some significant energy savings in there.
So with our role as an integrator, how can we be helping enterprise IT leaders experience the same benefits that Cisco created at PENN 1?
Yeah. So first of all, it's not necessarily all about the technology. So there are components to this. We'll specifically focus on the technology aspect and the impact that that has, but you also have to take into account from a HR perspective that you got to make sure you have good benefits and all those sort of things in there as well. So from a Cisco perspective, those things are there. If you then on top of that add in environments and buildings where people want to work and can collaborate, then you start to bring those things together, and the other statistics that I can give you, which is actually even more interesting one. Before the pandemic, we had about 140 people a day show up. After the pandemic, we have about 140 people a day show up. So some people will say, well, you spent all this money, and what was the gain? If you drill one level deeper, before the pandemic, we had about 200 unique people come to the office per month. After the pandemic, we have about nearly 700 unique people coming to the office per month. So what's happened is, although you have the same number of people, they are not the same people. So what's happening is we've been able to expand, and then quite frankly, we've been able to close a lot of our offices in the tri-state area, because we now touch a much wider community that then get this specific experience. And I can give you some specific examples then from an energy perspective, because to reduce your footprint by to reduce your energy consumption by 40%, as you know, is massive. That's huge. What happened during that time is, because we were managing those systems and managing the data that comes in there and using that, we actually changed our net zero target from 2050 to 2040. Because we realized what we could do when we expand this across all of our offices in there, the impact that we would have, let alone on the making your products. And I know before we talked about scope 1, 2, and 3 and all those sort of things. Before even doing that, we realized that's where we can get to. So we've set that as a target, and we are well on our way, and we report that every year. We report that in an ESG report. But you can do specific things, and some of those specific things are. I'll give you some examples. If the video systems that we have, Cisco video systems, have environmental sensors in them, so we can measure what the air quality is, temperature, humidity, and what have you, and feed that up into our air handling units. That's okay, but most air handling units have those sensors in them anyway. What's really important is we can do a people count, and then we can tell the air handling unit or the building how many people have just walked into the room. That's where you save an incredible amount of energy, because the most expensive part of any environment is the heating and cooling. That's the most, and that takes up the most energy. Now, you will know if you go to any BMS company, Honeywell, Johnson, Schneider Electric, they'll tell you for a given space how much air volume and how much fresh air they can deliver on a per person basis if they know the number of people. So now imagine that during the day, you can fluctuate that and control that from just that real expensive resource, and the amount of energy you can save by just integrating that into your Cisco video device. Then taking the next, go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, no, I was going to say, is that, so when you're talking about that 40% difference in energy consumption before and after the retrofit of PENN 1, did most of that energy savings come from things like the Cisco technology being able to sense when air conditioning and heating was not needed, or when the technology was turned off, because of this kind of built-in sensing and the combination of all this low voltage connectivity of all the devices kind of working in harmony? I mean, how would I achieve a 40% savings doing the same thing?
So it's a combination. So the first combination is like I said, we replaced a lot of the high voltage lights and shades and everything else, and made them low voltage power over Ethernet. So that's the first thing. The second thing is we replaced all of our Cisco video devices that were old generation to newer ones that naturally consume less power. So there's just the fundamentals of putting in devices that consume less power. In terms of the integration into the lights and shades, in the old building, they were controlled with racks and video switches, mixers, DSPs, everything else, and then analog devices that would then drive those lights and shades as well. That all went. So those were the sort of the fundamentals. Then you get to the other side of that, which is the control element. So I just touched on a little bit about the air conditioning. The second piece is the lights. So think about most organizations, what do they do with lights? They typically have a PIR sensor, an infrared sensor with a timer on it that says, if there is nobody in this room for 15 minutes, and after 15 minutes, go and switch off the lights. Very common everywhere across the world. Think when you multiply that effect, the number of times that during the business hours that somebody is not in that room, that every time when they leave, it triggers a 15-minute counter where you have 15 minutes of energy consumption before you turn the lights off. Multiply by the number of rooms you have as a specific customer, multiply that by the number of buildings in the planet, and you can see just a simple thing by an AVI-SPL taking a Cisco device, integrating it with a PoE lights, and turning that off when the last person walks out, because we do a people count and we sense people, so we know when the last person has actually walked out. What you'll also see is PENN 1. There's a lot of what they call sort of natural daylight harvesting. So you'll see that the lights will change depending on the amount of sunlight that's actually in there as well. So those are other techniques. There's a whole list of them. When you add them all up, you get into this notion of, oh, now I can really save energy. The challenge is you touched on IT. The challenge is sometimes the lights don't belong to IT, and sometimes the building looks at it and the owner looks at it and says, well, it's expensive to put in a PoE port and do a PoE light. And they look at it from an expense perspective. But they don't look at it and say, well, actually, how much metal am I saving? All of our desks, for example, are height adjustable. Our hot desks are all height adjustable with PoE. Well, so then when you look on the floor, you'll see no 110-volt receptacles in there. So think again about the amount of copper that you save, the control panels for that, the electrical control panels. So in essence, it looks on paper to be more expensive, but it actually isn't. Let alone, in this case, we're talking about New York City. You're fully aware of that. To get a union member high voltage is completely different than a low voltage person. So again, the cost there is significant when you can do low voltage and you don't have to do high voltage labor.
Right. And low voltage also gives you much more flexibility the next time you're retrofitting that space, right? Because it's easier to move.
That was, and that was another key. That was another key in there. And also our Cisco switches do, power over Ethernet, and currently it's UPE, I think it's plus or whatever, which gives you about 90 watts. So with one port, you can actually do quite a few lights, but you can't necessarily do, a 65-inch LCD display. You just don't have enough power for that, for example. But what Cisco is working on now is to do a class 4, which will, when it's released, do 1,000 watts. But again, to your point, Kelly, is you're not going to take out any of the infrastructures. You can now just add more ports and then power more things where you can then take away
much more modular. Everyone, it seems
very modular.
Everything, a lot of sustainable designs of the future are kind of hinging on this modularity, whether it's at the micro scale or the macro scale. And so when you were talking about using PoE and kind of building in the sensing technology, and not just sensing occupancy, but sensing number of people, I think back to the Internet of Things, and to me it's like for Cisco, it's the Internet of everything, right?
Exactly.
And so how do technology leaders, how would you recommend they start? I know we talked about starting from the technology as the core and working out to the building, but what are some other practical tips that we can give people who want to follow the same path that Cisco followed?
So I think part of it is to look at, so now we'll take it completely to the human side, because that's the very, very important side, the HR side. What is it that you are trying to achieve with your employees, and what is the value of that? We had one particular customer, they had 80,000 employees, and their attrition rate was 20% per year. And they said on average, obviously they're a very large employer, so they actually had very low, I was shocked at how low their hiring costs are, but you know what it costs to hire somebody, Kelly. But on average, they were paying $4,000 each time to hire a person. So you have 16,000 a year that each time you have to pay $4,000 for. Do the math on that. So if you're looking and saying it's important for me to drive employee engagement, to drive employee well-being, and we'll touch on that in a second, and to do that in a sustainable manner where people feel that they're actually included, irrespective of where they're actually working from, then you set up that sphere. Why is that important from an IT leader? Is because, quite frankly, all of these offices that we did had no IT budget. It all came out of HR. Because HR was in charge of the employee experience, and HR said, we know we need to invest to retain talent and to attract new talent, and we are not going to put a mandate on, and Cisco doesn't have a mandate, so then you have to do other things. So if you've got that view and that vision in mind, then everything else trickles down from there. I touched on engagement. So this is really where the Cisco video systems and the way the AVI-SPL can then integrate them into all the environments deliver an experience that is engaging. That does make people feel included. And I know this isn't the time to go into all those details, but those are the fundamental facts. So it helps people then say, when I go to the office, I know it's going to be as good, if not better, than what I have set up at home. Because lots of employees complain and say, what I have at home is better than when I go in the office. And sometimes when I go in the office, I don't have anything. So it's like, why are you asking me to come into the office when I feel I can be more productive actually at home? If
Right.
the office isn't worth the commute, then people aren't going to say, I just want to commute
Right.
to compute. They're not going to do that. The
Right.
second piece,
Oh,
go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say the second piece of that was which I touched on, was well-being. People assume that when you're at home that it's a far more healthier environment than you actually realize. And the amount of carbon dioxide pollution that you get sitting at home in an office is significant. However, if you don't measure it, you don't know it, because carbon dioxide is not going to kill you. It affects you and there's all sorts of studies in terms of productivity, mood, emotions, all those sort of stuff. But you don't know what it is that's actually doing there. With our Cisco devices and in a Cisco sort of hybrid office, you can see and know what the environment is. So I can now make a choice to say, you know what, I'm going to go in the office because it's actually better for my well-being. And the other piece to that, which is how we started this conversation from a sustainability perspective, is there's this notion that the only thing that pollutes is when I actually get into a vehicle and commute to the office. That's not true. 39% of the global greenhouse gases are emitted from buildings. So many cases, it's actually, you saw this during the pandemic, where an office building having 500 people would be empty. However, you still have to heat it and cool it. You can't switch it off. And then every single individual around there, living around there, is also heating and cooling their home. What percentage of those people do they end up being the only one in the house because their partner's gone into the office? If they have kids, the kids have gone to school, which is my situation here. I'm the only one here during the day, for example, many times. Then it might help me make a decision, if you can do the intelligence on it, to say, hey, it's actually a more sustainable option and it's less energy for you to actually travel to the office, even if it's by vehicle, let alone if you're in an urban area where you can take the train or the metro or whatever, then it would be for you to stay at home. But that data isn't, if you don't have the data, don't manage it, then you can't make it visible to the user. So that's a sustainability. And then from a well-being perspective and a safety perspective is the ability that AVI-SPL can integrate digital signage with emergency notification into our systems as well. If there ever is an emergency, it would be in all of the systems, in all of the conference rooms, outside all of the conference rooms. So then there's also a way that I know I'll be safe. And if the air quality, whatever, like we talked about before, goes low, then I do know that it's like the system will tell me that, and then I have the option to actually move away to another room. So you tie all of those together, and now it becomes a reason I'm going to go to the office, not just to collaborate or socialize, but it's better for my well-being, and it's actually a more sustainable option potentially. But unless you develop and use that data and drive that behavior with that data, people are going to not know.
Right. I think we could do a whole nother podcast just on the data that Cisco makes available.
Absolutely.
And how companies could be using it. Because you've made so many great insights here, or you've shared so many, really starting with what is the human experience of the space, What is the purpose behind what attracts people or what people need that space to do for them? How does that space fit into a larger sustainability story, understand its environmental impact? How do you optimize that space not only for the people and their well-being, but for what that building does in terms of the entire environment? There's lots of places we could go with this conversation, but I know I'm going to run out of time, Matthew.
Yes.
So I'm going to hand it back to you to wrap things up for us. And Chris, I look forward to the next time we get to talk about this.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Chris, for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure getting to just not only participate, but listen to the conversation as well. For those watching and listening to our podcast, if you would like to learn more about how AVI-SPL and Cisco can help you design, integrate, and manage workplace technologies that will support your ESG and sustainability initiatives, you can contact our experts today. Again, I want to thank you, Kelly and Chris, for joining me. It's, again, been what a pleasure just chatting with you on this episode of the Collaboration Space.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To everyone watching and listening, thank you for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to the Collaboration Space via our YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. And if you prefer the audio version of this podcast, just search for the Collaboration Space on your favorite podcast app. Thanks again, everyone, and goodbye for now. For more information, visit avispl.com/Cisco.